Welcome back. Last time we had started developing the dominant firm model. And implicitly the assumption was that there was just one dominant firm. Let's say the case of a pharmaceutical company like Pfizer. The dominant firm model, though, has broader applicability. It can also be applied to a setting where there are a group of firms that get together to cartelize a market and then behave as the dominant firm. OPEC's a wonderful example of this type of scenario. Let's first look at this session of the benefits of cartelization and what are the factors that promote cartels breaking down. We'll cover a variety of examples. It'll set the stage then for looking at OPEC in this session and the next. Let's look first at figure 13.7. And let's assume that this industry behaves in perfectly competitive fashion initially. So initially, and we'll assume that there are 20 firms in this industry, each producing initially 50 units of output. Panel A is for an individual firm, a representative firm in this industry, panel B for the entire industry. Price gets determined where demand equals the supply curve, the short-run supply curve. That price gets shot over to the individual firm. It's the representative firm's demand curve. And let's assume initially we're in long-run equilibrium. So where that price hits short-run marginal cost is also at the bottom of the short-run average cost curve. So where the marginal curves meet, the average curves meet as well for the representative firm. Profits are equal to zero. Ignore for now what the D star and the MR star represent. What if these firms get together, these 20 firms, and say, look, instead of each of us producing 50, let's scale back output to 35. Let's jointly restrict output, charge a higher price. We can get away with charging a higher price because overall, as we shrink industry demand, if there are 20 of us, each producing 35, we'll end up producing 700. We'll be able to, the market will bear a higher price, P1. And that's the price that will end up being shot over to a representative firm in this industry. If we do that, profits will be greater than zero. Why? Well, at that higher price, P1, it's above average cost, so we each make money. Before we made zero, it pays to cooperate. Why do cartels tend to break down? There are four reasons. First, there's an incentive to cheat, and we can see this in the preceding diagram. If we've restricted output, the price that ends up prevailing is above marginal cost. So each firm is tempted to expand output. I can make even more money if everybody else cooperates in restricting output and generating a higher price, but I'm the one that sells more. And the optimal output as a cartel member is Q2, provided that other firms keep restraining output to 35 units, and this one representative firm increases output. I make even more money than I would by keeping output at 35. Maximum profit, again, is where this new higher price hits the SMC curve. And then the profit is given by the difference between the average revenue, the higher average revenue curve at the cartel price, and the average cost, that hatched area. So any successful cartel, one of the undermining factors is this incentive for each firm to produce even more output. Another difficulty why cartels fail, it's hard to reach an agreement, especially if cost curves differ. If, in the case of OPEC, members were at war at certain times, Iraq and Iran. So imagine trying to reach output decisions, who's going to reduce output by how much. Recently, with the short-run accord, for example, that the United States has reached with Iran to keep it from enriching uranium, Part of the outcome will be that Iran will get to produce more oil than before and sell it on world markets. OPEC will now have to decide, how do we reduce output so that adding more output from Iran doesn't have a deleterious effect on the price we can charge on world oil markets. OPEC at times has employed accountants to monitor too of, once the agreement's been reached, are firms sticking to their accord. Third difficulty is anytime you're successful and profits are created, that signal will indicate to others that this is an industry we should shift resources into. And indeed, when OPEC initially proved successful in the 1970s, it started to draw in entrants from places like Russia and the North Sea over time that competed and worked to erode profits that members of OPEC were making. Even later in time, shale oil production and fracking in the United States. Nowadays, the United States is expected to become the world's leading oil producer by 2015. The profits from OPEC also created an incentive, a signal, that it's useful to spend resources to come up with competitive supply in this market. A fourth difficulty that cartels face is non-price cheating. Typically historically, between any two countries, only the country's flag carriers would be able to provide service. There were bilateral air operating rights. So when you flew between Germany and France, it was typically the German national carrier Lufthansa that could provide service, and the French national carrier Air France. They would agree on what price we'll charge, how much output we'll provide, but then another form of cheating that occurred was non-price cheating. To try to get more customers to fly on Air France would advertise, we've got wider seats, better meals, better flight attendants. And that's why still nowadays, when we look at international air advertisements or ratings of international airlines, international carriers typically do better than carriers performing just in the U.S. or emanating from the U.S. market. It's carriers like Singapore Airlines, stemming again from this non-price competition. And we saw this too in OPEC, that countries would agree on a certain amount of output, but there are different types of crude, and Nigeria would try to produce a higher quality crude and sell it on the market through its given quota. Let's go back one last time to figure 13.7. If just one firm cheats, then the demand curve it faces is this flat curve at P1. But if all firms cheat, then each firm in a sense has 1/20th of the market demand, D star, and the associated marginal revenue curve. So profits are maximized at reducing output to 35, but if each firm starts to cheat, the amount by which price declines is much greater than when you're the only cheater and face that flat demand curve. So you do also tend to see cheating be more likely when there are more firms in the market. Each firm, by increasing output, doesn't have as big effect on the overall market output level and can more easily get away with this cheating, and it's less likely to be noticed. So it's harder to maintain a cartel in cases where there are a greater number of suppliers. Do a couple applications. People have simulated cartel settings and how difficult it is to control cheating. A certain professor at Texas A&M, for example, Ray Battaglio, has set out payoffs associated with a cartel-type setting. And then you can either vote to cheat with turning in a piece of paper anonymously that says 1 on it, or comply. And one time he ran this experiment, there were 21 students in his class that ended up turning in a 1, saying that they would cheat. 6 that turned in a 0, saying we wouldn't cheat. One of the student leaders was upset. He said, we're screwing each other over. We're much better off if we all decide to comply and not cheat, if we put down 0s. And after that exhortation, they ran the experiment again. This time around, 4 people turned in 0s, didn't cheat. 23 ended up cheating. The exasperated student leader got very upset at his fellow students for doing even worse the second time around. But when questioned, he indicated, yeah, I was one of the ones that turned in the one. So it's very difficult in these settings not to control cheating. The cartel problem doesn't just apply to OPEC. It also applies to any firm that has a brand name, but multiple retailers of those brand name products. A few years ago, for example, Rolex took out full-page ads in the LA Times accusing its dealer in Los Angeles of selling faulty watches, of selling fake Rolexes. And it asked people who had bought Rolex from this dealer, Ken Marcus, to turn in their watches, and Rolex would verify that they were the real thing, and if not, give them back a real Rolex. It wasn't because Rolex was worried about this dealer selling fake watches. What they were really worried about is this dealer had worked out arrangements with other dealers of Rolexes around the country where Rolexes weren't selling as well. And he would make payments to these other dealers and then sell them at a discount in his LA market where business was brisker for the Rolex watches. Rolex could find out who was involved in this dealer's network by tracing the serial numbers on the watch, and thereby be able to clamp down on efforts to erode the price that Rolex wanted to maintain in the overall market and the quantities that were sold in each market. So anytime you have a brand name and you're selling at multiple locations, you in a sense have the cartel problem that you have to worry about.